Hello, lovely viewers, and welcome to another devlog. Now, I know I've been gone for a long time. There's at least two of you who've been thinking, where on earth is Worried Pixels, aka Jason? I do so love his videos where he shows the same scene every time and talks a load of nonsense. Well, for all two of you, I'm very sorry. I had a bit of an unplanned break, and I was ill for a couple of weeks. Well, ill for a week or so, and because I'd had a break from my game, because when I was ill, I didn't feel like working on my game or illustrations or anything. I found it hard to come back. I know that sounds a bit strange because I love working on this stuff, and I've certainly never for a second considered abandoning it. But I found after a break, it was hard to come back, and I just kept putting it off and putting it off. And then I started getting a bit anxious about the whole thing and thinking, oh, what if I don't remember how to do things? What if I get stuck? What if they've updated GDevelop and all my stuff's broken in the update? Silly things. And so I kept staying away from it. And I would always say to myself, well, I'll do it tomorrow. I'll do it at the weekend. And then before you know it, 2 months have gone by and you've not worked on your game, and then you have started to forget how things work. So a couple of weeks ago, 4 weeks ago, I gave myself a bit of a push, and I sat in front of the computer and I started working on the game again. And as probably a lot of you will experience this, that when you have a break from it and you manage to push yourself to go back, within 5 minutes you're having a great time with it again, wondering why you were so silly to have this break from it. I've reconnected with it and rediscovered the joy of it. And I gave advice in another video about how it's important to engage with your project every single day. And I wasn't taking my own advice, because once you have a break from it, it can get harder and harder to go back. You build it up into a big deal. Maybe you get anxious about it, and you don't go back. Well, not for a long time. So if you load up your project every single day, well, I mean, you can give yourself a break, of course, every now and again for a day or two. But and obviously, if you've gone away on holiday, you can't do it either. But generally speaking, load your project up every day, even if it's just for 10 minutes, and make sure you keep that connection to your project alive. Because if you let it go weeks, months, it just becomes harder to come back. But anyway, once I sorted myself out, I started work on a new interaction for my game. And I've always wanted this, is Trevor to be able to examine objects in the environment. And he sometimes will get a full screen graphic because of that. And then he'll be able to examine objects in this graphic. So let me just show you what that looks like. So those of you who've watched some of my videos before will know about these icons that pop up. When Trevor walks near to something he can interact with, he gets this icon popping up on screen, and then you can press a button and something will happen. So you might launch dialogue with an NPC, you might transition to another scene. In this case, you examine the cookery book, the recipe book that he's standing next to. And actually, let me just talk about the graphics a little bit. So the floor, it's these sort of blue and grey tiles. And when he opens this pop-up, you can see the blue and grey tiles beneath the book, because he's holding the book in front of himself. And he's got this, but because he's focusing on the book, the floor is blurry. So I just wanted that continuity to make it feel like it's part of the same world. And this recipe, by the way, is a real recipe. You can screen grab it and do it, and it'll work, I promise. It's a recipe I've been using for years and years, and it's a very reliable, easy sponge cake. And it's very adaptable as well, actually. You can easily turn it into a chocolate cake or a fruit cake or something as well. By the way, just a note to any chefs that are interested, if you wanted to turn it into a chocolate cake, you'd have to deduct some of the flour and replace it with cocoa so that the amount of dry ingredients stays the same. But this isn't a cookery video, so I'm not going to go into how many grams of cocoa you need if you're going to, but I'm just saying this is a real recipe. I thought it would be quite fun in the game if, when I show things like this, they're real. and somebody could screen grab the game and make this recipe, which is yeah, I liked the idea of that. This recipe is vegan and veggie friendly, and it's also okay for lactose intolerant people because you're not using cow milk in it. And as you'll know, of course, Trevor is a sheep, and he's going to be in a world with cows and sheep and chickens, farmyard animals, some other animals as well. And they would not be drinking milk because that would be weird. If one of Trevor's neighbours may well be a cow, so if he was making a cake with cow milk in it, that would be very strange in the context of this world. So we're not going to do that. Whenever food is mentioned, I think it will be very much plants and things made from plants. And anyway, but I won't get more political than that. You don't care what I eat for dinner. But in the context of this world, this recipe makes sense. So right, so when these full screen pop-ups happen, you get these, but these are only placeholder, by the way. They don't fit in with the art style of the game. They're just to remind me at the moment of the buttons, which is also something I need to think about, because at the moment I've got all sorts of different buttons for doing different things in the game. I need to make it so that it will work with a controller, and I also don't want people to have to remember 10 different buttons for my game, so I'll have to figure out a standard kind of button collection that I'm going to use. But anyway, these prompts appear. If you press Y to examine, the dialogue system gets launched and Trevor will comment on what he's looking at. In this case, it's just one line of dialogue, and then if you press the button, the dialogue closes and the buttons come back at that point, because you don't want to be telling people how to examine something when they're already examining it. So the button disappears, the prompt disappears, and I don't want the player to be able to close the whole pop-up when the dialogue's running. So that disappears as well. Plus, it's impossible when the dialogue's running to close this pop-up until the dialogue has ended. I've locked it all down, because sometimes when you're examining something, a quest might get added or an item might be given to Trevor. If you can close this whole interaction halfway through a dialogue, it's just gonna get a bit messy. It might break, and things that I need to happen won't happen if the player is impatient and closes everything down before certain things have happened. Because this might be 3 lines of dialogue, right? And on the second line of dialogue, a quest gets added to the quest log. And maybe on a third line of dialogue, he gets, I don't know, given a pack of margarine or something. And if the player can just close the whole thing anytime they like, that's going to break the sequence. Unless they open it and read it properly. So it's kind of, you can only close this when the dialogue has closed. So you only figure things like that out when you start working on it. You think, oh, I don't want the player to be able to do that while that's happening, because that will break the thing. And yeah, it gets really, as the game gets bigger, it gets more complicated, and trying to figure out what the player might try to do and whether you want them to be able to do that and how to prevent it. It's as much about what you want the player to do as you want the player not to be able to do sometimes. So there you go. That's it's as simple as that. This uses the same dialogue system. Actually, let me just show you the dialogue UI external layout this is, and obviously you've got portraits and name tags here, but for the pop-ups, I don't want name tags and yarn commands and things, so it's a stripped back version. And I've included my buttons in the dialogue external, although strictly that is to do with the pop-up as a whole, not to do with the dialogue system, but I think this is the place it makes the most sense. What I did with the actual dialogue system events, I tried a few different things. I tried using the existing dialogue system for both scenarios, but that got really messy, and I had, you have to solve a lot of different problems. Actually, it got quite messy, and I thought, you know what, maybe I'll just copy my whole dialogue system and customize it for these pop-ups. So that's what I did. So I've got 2 copies of my dialogue system. Let me messy, aren't I? I've got 2 copies of my dialogue system, and one will get invoked for NPC dialogue, and one will get invoked for pop-up. So with the pop-up version, I was able to delete certain things from it, and I was then able to customize it to be exactly the way I wanted it for this second scenario. So I'm sure there, are various different ways of doing this kind of thing. If you've got a dialogue system, but you want the dialogue system to do 2 very different jobs, I'm sure there are all sorts of clever, dynamic ways of doing that. But what I ended up doing, I just copied the block, and I activate the one I want using a Boolean toggle there, or just a Boolean condition. And that's worked out really well for me, and it keeps them completely separate. So I know that if I break this, this is not going to be broken, and vice versa. So I quite like having them separate. And most of the game, this is not running at all, because there aren't going to be that many of these pop-ups. Most of the time this block will be launched. But anyway, that's how I've handled it. So the other big thing I've been working on is a 4th scene for Trevor. So let me just zoom out a little bit and show you. He will appear on the right here. He'll be exiting the left of the other scene and appearing on the right. And it's a row of businesses here. He'll be able to go into some of these. And I'm particularly pleased with my pub here, the Grumpy Cow. And I looked at lots of photographs of pubs to sort of design my own pub. And I look at lots of reference photos actually for everything. I often use Google Street View, and I drop myself in places in there that I'm familiar with. And I just sort of look in the streets and so on at pubs and shops and things as reference, to help me choose colours, to help me choose, the basic sort of style of stuff. And obviously I'm looking at photographs, but my artwork is a very stripped back, simple style. But I always use photographs as a starting point to help me sort of visualize. And I often choose colors based on photographs as well. So the color palette is a more sort of realistic color palette, rather than lots of really mega bright sort of cartoony colors. A lot of the colours so far in my game are a bit more sort of grounded, and I quite like that. That's just a me thing. So yes, and I've got a door floating in the sky there, and I've also got Trevor on the scene as well. Well, it's not a scene yet, it's an Illustrator file. And having these here, the door and Trevor, just helps me make sure the scale of anything new I'm doing is correct. I don't want the doors to suddenly be, sort of like that. So I copy a door from my other artwork, and I copy Trevor over, and I use them constantly to measure against new artwork I'm doing, so it stays the right size. So, and of course the right scale rather. And of course I did the recipe book as well. This is all separate shapes here. Here's a look behind the curtain for you here. It's all separate shapes in Illustrator, which I love using Illustrator. I'm such an Illustrator geek. And I add the background and the actual recipe itself in Photoshop, because I find that Photoshop renders text a bit better, I think, than Illustrator does. When you export from Illustrator, I'm sometimes not too happy with the way the text looks, but that's really geeky detail that you don't need at all. So that's the end of my devlog, I think. I've got my full screen pop-up thing happening, and I will do different versions of that. I'm probably going to have one where Trevor can choose to examine different areas of the pop-up. So maybe Trevor looks at a notice board, and on the notice board are different notices, and he can examine, using some kind of selection that I haven't set up yet, he can choose to examine different notices on the notice board. So I will do that in the future when I get to it. But that's it for now. Yes, sorry again that I've been gone so long. As I say, I'm sure there are 2 people who are very sad and wondering, where is Jason? I really want to see more of that daft Trevor business. And yeah, the next devlog won't be nearly as long, and who knows, maybe I'll come back with a tutorial or something. But I'm back. I'm fully engaged with my project, having a jolly good time once more with it, and I'm going to really try not to have any more unplanned breaks. Anyway, thanks very much for watching this devlog, and I will see you soon.